1, 2, 3.
Hello there, my name is Craig Tarwater. I'd like to welcome you to this video school of guitar production, how to play great blues guitar, level 2. Today we'll be talking about how to play good chords, good leads based on the simple pentatonic and blues scales, and we'll also get involved in some good string bending ideas for all the various positions. Also, I'd like to have you remember that there are only 5 positions to play on the guitar as far as the shapes that are generated by the open major chords, which is what all of this stuff is all about, okay? So first let's go to a tuning note, and this will be an A, 5th string, 440, concert pitch. Here's a 12th fret harmonic for you, okay? All right, now you're in tune, so you should be ready to play along. By the way, we'll also be featuring a chance for you to play a phrase while I lay out on camera, and then I'll come back in while you lay out off camera, and that way we can interact and you can copy what I do. Okay, and we'll try to do that on just the examples where we have the play along with our backup band, that is. Okay, first of all, a note on blues. In order to play blues, if you remember from level 1, we discerned, hopefully, for most of you anyway, between the shuffle feel and the straight feel. The shuffle feel, just to reiterate, is a long and a short, or a hard and a soft note. That would be 8th notes. In other words, da, 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 da. Okay? Then the straight feel is just da, 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 da. You should still be able to swing in the straight feel. Your phrasing should still be good. And something we haven't discussed before in any of the videos, we'll touch on that more in level 3, is how phrases are built. They span across a measure of musical time. A measure of musical time, once again, being 4 notes, 4 beats well, 4 notes, 4 beats, but there could be 3 notes, there could be 12 notes. The object is 1, 2, 3, 4 is how everything is measured. So let's go ahead and go to a picture of my left hand, which will show you some things about chords and strumming them. And I'd like to say first, if you would refer to your fretboard logic chart that I use, and we'll be showing you that in a little while. The first thing we can do is the C form. Okay, so it starts down around C, of course, but I would prefer to go onto the fingerboard so you can see the major chord shape. And this is it. That would be a D major chord. Okay, in blues, more often than not, what happens is you use seventh chords. You don't hear too many blues with major chords, mostly seventh chords. So a really good seventh chord is the three-note seventh chord. And based out of the C form, this is it. Okay? Also, based out of the C form, if you just put your pinky down and move your finger off of the fifth string, you have that chord. And you can also play this one if you want. Okay, those are what we call inversions. There's another one, but it's too low. It has a muddy sound, so you have to avoid things like that. That would sound fine way up here. Sound even better up here. But we can do it easier on higher strings. So anyhow, D7, D7, D7. Those are all three D7 chords. Okay, and another good chord to play out of this shape, although it starts to borrow from the position of the A form, is the D9. And it can also be played just the first four strings. Also borrowing from the A form, you can play the 13 chord. And that's the only 13 chord in this two shapes that we're going to show you on this tape. Okay, so now let's touch on the 4 chord and the 5 chord in the C form also. The 4 chord of D is 1, 2, 3, 4, G. There's the E form major, but this sits in the C form shape of D. For those of you who are confused about this, look and see what the shapes are for the key chord, the 1 chord, and then take your other chords and count them out from the scale and play them in the same area. Okay, anyhow, G major. So we have a G7. And that's basically the good sounding one, the one where you put your pinky down. What I call the I feel fine chord is a little bit subject to review for blues because you have duplications of the F note. And it just tends to sound a little bit too heavy on the F note. Okay, so a good one to use also is a 3-fingered or 3-note chord. This is your D7 3-note chord. Here's your G7 3-note chord. You need to play it like this and have the first finger lay down over the 5th string just a hair, so it's muted out. Okay. So that's an excellent shape of the G7 4 chord, and as well that can be slid up 2 frets to get your 5 chord. Okay. Then you can play a triad from each of those, which would be this type. That's A7, that's D or G7. And here's another way to play G7 as a triad, or if you add the first string, then you have a 4-note chord. There's an A7, there's the triad. Another triad you can play for the G7 is using the undesirable F note in the master form by just doing this. Those are all three the same type of triad. Okay, we won't discuss the theory because most people tend to shy away from that. Just suffice it to say that we're using part of a chord form. The first three strings. Then on this one, the second, third, and fourth string. Okay, now let's go up to the A form of D. These examples will all be D, by the way. Okay, here's a D7 on the inside four strings. There's a triad, and you notice I play it without the third finger. Some people will play it with the third finger, and they won't use the pinky. Some people's pinkies are weak. Okay, so we can play this triad. We can also play this triad, exactly the same fingering shape, moved up to the third, fourth, and fifth strings. That's a real good one. In fact, if you can play that with a bar in the third finger, and you can reach up and play the sixth note right there, just in case you wanted to know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Remember do, re, mi, and counting the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 with do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, and you will never be able, or I should say you'll always be able to explain what you're doing. Okay, so anyhow, so that's a real good 12 feel or swing shuffle feel to do with that particular shape of the D7 chord, the A shape. Okay. Now there's one other one, and this works pretty good for the older blues. Sort of like the howling blues. Also, it was one of the simple forms that was taught years ago from the A7 chord. Just moved up to D. So it becomes a D7. All right? Now, we need to look at the G form. There isn't a whole lot to do with seventh chords in the G form, but it's a good scale shape, and we'll be showing you that close up later on. So basically, I would say if you're playing that shape, you're in the G form. But when you get to the 4 chord, you have the C form of the G7. Okay? You also have the D shape, D form of the A7. You can go down to the G7, which I forgot to mention while we were in the A shape. So, okay, now let's move up to the E form, which we already know. That's a D7. So let's look at this progression from here to here and see what we've done. D7, 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 all D7 chords. Okay, and each one of them has a scale shape laying around it, and that's what we'll be showing you in just a little bit here. Okay, now the G7, 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 and G7. Or you can take a chord shape like C form and move up and down. A lot of guys do that when they're first starting. Although it leaves you somewhat limited, and it also says you don't know anything in here. So you have to look at all the possibilities. Okay? Anyhow, G7, 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 and G7. Now, A7, 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 and A7. Okay? The last shape we have to look at is the D shape. Turn down my distortion hair there. Okay, that's a D7 chord. There's a G7. And there's an A7. A7. 12 frets higher, you're guaranteed to get another A7. All right, we're going to look at the minor pentatonic and the modified minor pentatonic, which is called the blues scale, in the C form. And this is the first shape of the C form on the fingerboard in a recognizable key, the key of D. Okay, here we go. We'll just do the scale from D to D first. Okay, and it can be fingered a variety of different ways, so just settle on the fingering you're most comfortable with. Okay, this is the standard way that most guitarists do it. All right, D, F, G, A, C, D, D, C, A, G, F, and D. Okay, now with the blues note, that is just including one half step higher than the G to play a G sharp, and we'll do it like this then. Okay, now we can also play that scale above and beyond the octave barriers. In other words, we can play notes. We have some notes below the low D, and we have some notes above the high D. So let's play the whole scale. Here's just the minor pentatonic. G, A, C, D, F, G. Now we start repeating, don't we? A, C, D, F, G, and A. Now with the flat 5 or note or sharp 4 note, we have the G sharp. So we have one there, we have one here, and one here. Okay, so those are the only extra new notes from the one we just demonstrated. So let's do that one. G, G sharp, A, C, D, F, G, G sharp, A, C, D, F, G, G sharp, A. Now the scale sounds pretty good all by itself. Okay, now let's look at a few licks we can do at a level 2 focus, okay? Because we already have just now learned this scale, so there are licks. Now in the D shape, there are certain notes that bend well and others that don't, and some that are hard for some people and some that are easy for other people. So basically, we can take this first note or this last note of the scale in the position, and we can bend it to the sound of a B, which is one step. So we can do, and you use the fingers down from the actual fretting finger to lay on the string behind it and help push it. So I'm using 3 fingers to bend that note. That's why it's easy. And when you bend the note, don't do this. This is what a lot of first-time people do. They let it down because they can't hold it up. If you're going to have to let it down, choke it out before it comes down. That will also help you attain pitch recognition on the bending. Okay, so there's a bona fide lick, and watch how this sounds. Okay, not much of anything, but it still sounds good. Okay, now let's go on to the second string, licks we can do. Okay, that's bending the E note to the sound of an F sharp. That one can also be bent a half step when you're playing on the G7 chord. See, so sometimes you want to alter how far you bend a note to suit the chord you're playing it across or over or on top of. So that's very simple to do once you practice it for a little bit. And also notice again that these 2 other fingers are helping this finger do the bending. See, so we got quite a bit of licks going right now. Now basically, the only other stuff I bend in this shape is the C, I bend to D. That's not one that I would bend a half step for D. You could, but it sounds funny. It doesn't sound funny when it's slid, but it sounds funny bent. And the D string, the 4th string, at the G note can be bent a half step. So let's review those. Whole step bend on the 1st string. A whole step or a half step bend on the 2nd string. A whole step bend on the 3rd string. And a half step bend on the 4th string. Okay, now let's go on up to the A form and let's look at the basic scale from D to D. So we get that down. This is the A shape. This is the way it's played by almost everyone. Okay, and this is the minor pentatonic scale. D, F, G, A, C, and D. Now when it's played as a blues scale in the 1 octave form, we're only going to have our G sharp right there. So we would play this one, the blues scale, this way. D, F, G, G sharp, A, C, and D. Now to play below this D and above this D, all we need to know is watch this video. Okay, so here we go. A, C, D, F, G, blue note, G sharp, A, C, D, F, G. Now we can do our G sharp down here. To A, or we can do it here. Or we can slide A, C. Okay? All right, before we go too much further, I would like to recommend to you a real fine book here, and it's called Fretboard Logic. It's written by Mr. Bill Edwards of Tampa, Florida, and it's available from Video School of Guitar. It's also available from Edwards Music Publishing in Temple Terrace, Florida. He advertises in the back of Guitar Player magazine. This book illustrates and breaks down what happens in the 5 shapes of scales and chords that are played on the fingerboard, no matter what key you're in. Okay? Now, if you'll refer to a chart that I have made of my own derivation that's on your screen now, this is how I perceive fretboard logic. It's just a little bit different than he has in mind, but it's essentially still laying down the same ground rules. 5 shapes for any key. These are the common keys that are used to play music in the guitar, on the guitar that is, and especially even in blues. The keys of C, the keys of A, the key of G, key of E, and the key of D. Okay? So if you'll just take a little look at this chart, you perhaps may want to get the book. Okay, here we are back at our A form in the key of D, our A shape. Form or shape, get those words straight. They both mean the same darn thing. Okay, now here's our high note in the shape or the form, the C note. So let's see what we can do in this key with string bending to help us have licks. Okay, now the C can be bent a whole step, which will be to the D note. So all you do is push it up with your pinky and use at least the 3rd and maybe the 2nd and possibly even the 1st finger all behind it. Okay, watch how it works. You also have to guard against what just happened there where I hit the other string and made a sound. You can also bend that with your 3rd finger. Anyhow, that's one bend. So just in a simple sort of way, you have a lick right there. Okay, and then you can bend the B, which is not part of the scale, but it still works. You can also use non-scale notes. You have to know that. There's a lot of notes right there. You just have to try them. Okay, now to the 2nd string. The G note can be bent a half step, can be bent a whole step. The F note needs to be bent with the 3rd finger, although some guys do it with the 1st. Whichever works for you, 2nd finger. But it's generally a whole step bend in this key, the key of D. Although sometimes you can get a nice effect by a half step bend. So as you're beginning to see, I hope, there aren't any real rules. Just make sure you know the basic scale shape. Okay, so okay, now is a chance to borrow from a form, which is the G form, And here's our A shape, but we can still borrow while we're there. Okay, so that's one thing that can be done. You can borrow from the adjacent forms. Here's our D bent up to a whole step. Here's our C bent up a whole step. And that's usually about as far as I bend, as far as strings. I bend on the first three strings. I don't use any real string bends in this shape, the A shape. Sometimes I pull down on the F note here on the 8th fret. And sometimes I do bend that A. A lot of guys don't bend up like that because they get too close to the edge of the fingerboard, but I do because I'm risky. You can do that too, but I still don't do these. Traditionally, I will just do this. Okay, let's go on to the G form. Let's see what we have there. Okay, and in the key of D, that's 7th position. So let's look at the scale first from D to D. In this case, in this scale shape, we can look at 2 octaves. From this D, 10th fret, to this D, 7th fret, to that D on the first string at the 10th fret. So let's go ahead and look at the basic minor pentatonic scale. We have D, F, G, A, C, D. Now we start repeating ourselves with an F, a G, an A, C, and finally our high D. Okay, now our blues note will be the G sharp, and that can be played 2 different ways in the first octave of this shape. So let's do this now. D, F, G, either G sharp right there or right here. This is 6th fret on that was 6th fret on the 4th string. 6th fret, 11th fret on the 5th string. Okay, then we go on to our A, our C, our D, our F, G, the blue note again, which is a G sharp or an A flat, A, C, and D. Now let's look at a few licks we can do. And I like to do them from the high strings down to the low strings because most of the power emotionally comes from the high notes. Okay, so first the D can be bent a whole step. The C can be bent a half step, and it's actually more of a color note because it doesn't really get to a C sharp. It just kind of goes. Feel the power of that? Okay, so bending the D, a whole step, a half step, bending the C just a quarter of a step. There is no such thing. You just bend it till it sounds blues. Okay, now we go to the A note. Whole step. The G note. We're actually back down in our A form, aren't we? See, they run into each other, so sometimes that happens. Okay, now, the E note, which is not part of the scale, but it happens to be another chromatic tone out of the scale that can be bent. Okay, the F note, whole step, and once again, that's pretty much about where I stop bending. You can do that with the fifth string with the G note. So a lot of times your bends that you choose will have to do with whether you're playing the 4 chord, the 5 chord, or the 1 chord. Okay? We'll move on up to the E form now. Alright. Now this is the one everyone seems to know. Once they've learned the first pentatonic scale, this is the one that seems to be taught. I guess because it comes from the E chord, and everybody can play an E chord usually by the time they've got this far. Okay, here's our scale, which also has 2 octaves contained within it. From this D, 10th fret, to this D at the 12th fret on the 4th string, to this D on the 10th fret on the 1st string. Okay, so we'll start on the top, or the bottom, as it were, the low string. D, F, G. Now we'll speed up here a little bit. This is the blue note, which is the G sharp. There's the A, the C, D, F, G, A, C, and D. Okay, so there's one blue note, there's the other blue note. Okay, here it is. Okay, now, on bending in this particular shape, I like to bend the F a whole step. I like to bend the E, which is again not part of the scale, but it's a chromatic tone when used in this scale. I like to bend it a half step to an F. And sometimes I like to let the bend down. That's called reverse bending. It's called pre-bent and then released. Very important tool. Okay, then the C bends real nice a whole step. The B, which again is not a normal scale tone, bends 1/2 step. And then sometimes I do this, I bend the A with the first finger. And you see how my second finger jutted out there and was doing absolutely nothing. Well, that's a case for stepping down to the next lower form and bending with the assistance of an extra finger. Look at how all 3 of them work. The non-scale note, the scale note, and the scale note. Okay. Okay, now down here, the G bends good a whole step, or a half step. Okay, once again, moving down into the neighboring scale shape form, the G form, we can bend the F a whole step. And that's how it works when you step in and out of the scale form. Okay, now bending in this area is also usually limited. Normally you aren't going to find anybody doing that because it just doesn't sound convincing. Probably sounds more convincing with overdrive, but we don't have much of that today. Okay, so here's just a sample at this point, since this is the most widely used scale form. Here's a sample of some simple licks to do using the bends I've described, in conjunction with some pull-offs and some hammer-ons. Okay, I'll do them as slow as I can. Don't forget about your vibrato. Let's go on up to the last shape, the D shape. Okay, and here we are. Called that because if you barred a D chord from the open position and moved it up 12 frets, this is how you would have played it down in 12th position, or open position. This is how you play it in 12th position. Okay, now, so here's our scale. And here we have to kind of start on the 4th string, if you will, because we don't have any D's below this. All right? So we have D to D. So you can see that this would be very useful on top of the E form, where you might normally in the E form be doing something like this. It just gives you some flexibility. Okay, so let's look at the D to D, and we'll add the blue note. D, F, G, G sharp, the blue note, A, C, D. Now, we can look at the whole scale because we can play on either side of the octave notes, as always, and all the preceding examples prove that. Here's our lowest note in this shape, F, G, and we can either play the G sharp with our pinky, or we can play it right there. It might be handier, more often than not, to play the blue note from the D shape form on the 5th string. Okay, so we have F, G, G sharp or G sharp, A, C, D, F, G, the blue note, G sharp, A, C, D, F, G, and we can put the G sharp right there. Now, let's look at some string bending and some licks. This time, let's incorporate a few things to do with slides, okay? So what we have here is we have a slide from the G to the G sharp with a pull-off to the F and a hammer back on and pull off. Watch how it works. Now we can incorporate a bend of a whole step on the tail end of that lick. So we can do like this. And it sounds real good. Right off the bat, it's a world-class lick. Especially if you put a little vibrato on the D note. Okay, so the bends that I generally use in a D form, more often than not, will be bending this note, bending that one a little bit, and that was a G bent to A, back down to G, and F just kind of sideways a little bit to a D. Okay, now the D I will also bend a half or whole step here. If I bend it a half step, I'll generally probably be thinking of a different chord. Okay, now the third string. This one sometimes I like to bend what's called a minor third, which is a step and a half. And watch what happens when I do it. That probably came from early Eric Clapton exposure that I had. He used to do that a lot. Notice the trill. It's just a fast hammer-on pull-off. It's actually a trill if you keep it going. Okay, and then I pretty much stop bending on the fourth string right about here. Once again, I'm bending a non-scale note, but it's a chromatic note in the scale, the E note. So here's a sample of just a simple lick in the D shape. Okay, now here's the fun part. We're going to play along, and I'm going to play some licks, and I'll tell you what form and shape I'm using, and I'm just going to play by phrases. That means approximately, say, this is a slow blues in G, so I'll be starting probably with the E form, because that's the one everyone knows. And what I'll do is I'll play like 1, 2, 3, 4, then I'm going to quit, and then you play the next phrase of the same time. And that 1, 2, 3, 4, incidentally, really occupies 2 measures of time, because that's how the slow blues and the shuffle blues, their phrasing is. The phrasing goes across the bar line or the measure line and goes into the second measure. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this, and I'll tip the band, and you watch my hands and listen to my voice.
1, 2, 3.
C form, still. Now I consider it E form. That's why I called it C form, because of the D7. Your turn. Okay, so I'm going to give you 4 measures. Here I go. Out of the way. Your turn. Don't worry about the weird chords, just stay in this form. Let's go to the D form. Your turn. Stay in the D form. If you stay on the chord tones and the scale tones, you won't really have any trouble with those chords, which happen to be A minor and B minor. Let's play a little rhythm. He's playing a 13 chord right there. This is a 9th chord. Down to a 7th My turn. Your turn in the A form. There's a helper note for you. All right, I certainly hope you've all been able to learn from this, and I invite you to look forward to level 3, and I also invite you to purchase the book Fretboard Logic. Once you've gone into it, all of the things I've been talking about will become very, very clear to you. Okay? So what we're going to do is wish you good luck, good success, and I'll say goodbye, and I'd like you to watch my hands because I'm going to play all the different forms on the song we just did. Bye for now.
1, 2, 3.